welcome to another episode of FooBar. Today, I want to start a new series of videos in which we talk about what are the challenges and how to build a multi-region serverless architecture. In this series, we are covering first in this video why you don't need a multi-region application. And then we are going to cover some concepts that might help you to architect for those. In the following videos, we are going into the challenges and how to address them with patterns of architecting software and AWS services that will help you out. So stay tuned for all the videos that are coming in the next weeks. So if you're watching this video, you might be curious, or you might need, or you have built a multi-region serverless application and what we call active-active, where both of the regions are working. So in this video, I want to start talking why organizations will go and do that. And maybe if you are thinking about doing it, you can check if it's something you also need, and then why not to do it. So let's start one step backwards and understand a little bit of what is AWS infrastructure. Let's understand that basically by the time I'm recording, we have 27 regions around the world. Each region is located in a city or in a country. We have Dublin, we have Stockholm, we have Paris, we have London, we have Virginia, we have Oregon. You get the drill, all around the world. These regions have at least 3 availability zones. And this is how the regions are composed. So a region is not a data center. It's a collection, a set of data centers that are even, availability zones are even more than data centers. Availability zones are kind of the foundation of the region, and they are separated. So there are at least 3, depending on the size of the region. But whenever we launch a new one, they have 3 availability zones. And these are connected with super fast cable, but they are far enough. So they're around 60 to 100 kilometers separated, but they're far enough to, if there's any natural disaster like a tornado or an earthquake or something like that, the 3 availability zones will not get impacted, but they're close enough so the laws of physics like latency, how the time the data needs to travel around some cables, and we cannot fight that. So they're close enough for that physics to not really impact the whole synchronization aspect. So when we think about a region and we use regional services, we can take them as they're all in the same data center, while in realistic they are very isolated and they're very resilient. So now that you understand how a region works, my next question for you is why you want to build a multi-region architecture or a multi-region application. And I will start with the opposite question, why you don't want to build one. The first one is that if you have an application that is scattered all around the world or replicated all around the world, the laws of physics will start applying, because when we have a region with its availability zones, they are close enough, but regions tend to be far away from each other. So when you have data in Virginia and you want to synchronize it with Singapore, there we cannot avoid physics, and we might have 300 milliseconds of latency. And adding that latency into our applications makes it very challenging. So these numbers I'm giving are just random numbers. You can always check in the descriptions of the regions what are the latencies to other regions. But the speed of light in a cable is what it is, and it takes time. So if we have something in one side of the world and other side of the world, it depends on how the cables are connected under the ocean and where is the entry point and all these things, and that increased the replication lag. The other challenge, and this is even more serious than the previous one, is that you need to make sure that you test everything, because it's very easy to use AWS and have all your things replicated everywhere. But if you don't test it, and you don't test it continuously and you don't test it creatively, the moment that you want to rely on that failover regions, then you might find a surprise that nothing is working. So testing is fundamental, and you need to make sure that you are testing creatively, that you're testing your failovers, that your processes, not only your technical solutions, are good. You need to make sure that also your human aspects, your DevOps process, everything is on pair of having this. So basically, if you don't test, you just add complexity and cost to your applications without adding any benefits. So basically, if you are not putting effort, not only like applying cool services into your applications, you're adding complexity. The more complexity you add into your applications, the biggest risk you have of failing. So once I heard this story about a company that decided to go to this multi-region strategy, and they want to have everything active, meaning all the regions working all the time. And few months in, they implemented everything they wanted with these strategies, and they came back to us and say, this multi-region active is too expensive, it's too complex. Can you help us? And basically, our solution architects went into their whatever they have built, and they realized that they have built all their applications, all their systems to be multi-region and to be active, even their cafeteria menu. Like, that's not critical. So when you're thinking about a multi-region strategy, you need to understand where are the risks and why you need to do that. What type of risk you're trying to mitigate by adding this complexity, and you don't need to implement it in your whole application. When you add complexity, you add more risk to failure. And if you look about the most typical reasons why things fail, is code deployments and misconfigurations. That's the biggest reason why our customers' services fail. They deploy something, it was not properly tested, boom, everything exploded. So that's one of the most common reasons why things explode. And that is not solved with a multi-region strategy. Actually, that risk is incremented in a multi-region strategy. More likely problems are core infrastructure failure. So here you might have some instance failing or some particular service failing. And here you need to understand that if you are not working with a serverless architecture, you might implement your own high availability within the region. So for example, if you are using EC2, you need to have a high available solution. That means you need to deploy your application in multiple availability zones. And if you're using a regional service like Lambda will take care of doing that for you. So usually this problem tends to be quite smaller in the case of a serverless service, because regional services, like services that you don't need to worry about the availability zones they are deployed in, tend to be more resilient because that resiliency is built on by AWS and you don't need to worry about it. Then another common scenario is data and state issues. So something got lost. And in here is where strategies of backup and restore tend to be very useful. So here is where we could have a backup and restore strategy with a multi-region approach in order to make sure that everything that you have is replicated somewhere else, and if for any reason something gets corrupted, you can recover it from somewhere else. This strategy is quite simple, and you can do it with almost any AWS service that stores data, and I will show you later on the videos, and it doesn't add that much complexity to your solution. And finally, we have the cases that are quite unlikely, like a full region going down, a natural disaster, a zombie apocalypse, and there is where your multi-region strategy might come into play. So it's very interesting to understand how multi-region will help you. And you have this idea on, are you really investing on the right thing? So now let's talk about why you want to do multi-region. Because if you're still watching, maybe you really want to do multi-region, and that's totally valid. Many of our customers in AWS are doing a multi-region strategy, and there are valid reasons for doing it. So let's evaluate those reasons. The first reason is business continuity. Basically, your service can never be down. You need a disaster recovery plan in which you cannot tolerate any downtime. If you are implementing multi-region because of this reason, you need to be very careful with the dependencies that you have between your different regions and also with your third parties, because you really need to be ready for a failover. That's the main idea. So here testing becomes critical. So you may have users in different parts of the world connected to different regions, and if one of the services go down for any reason, you need to be able to fail over your users to the other region. You might have this case that I'm showing you in the slide that everything is active, so in that sense it's quite straightforward, but you could have a region that is not really active right now, and you need to really make sure that it's working and everything is configured fine. The second reason why you want to have a multi-region active solution is because you have customers that are distributed geographically around the world, and you want to make sure that they will have the lowest latency possible. So imagine that you have your users in San Francisco, in New York, in London, in Australia, and all of them are connected to different regions in order to decrease the latency. Here you have all your regions active, but you can have more dependencies between your regions because you are not doing it for disaster recovery, you're doing for latency. So here you might have your user-facing applications in each of the regions, but then you might have a primary region where you do everything else. And that part of the system is not that big of a deal on latency. So you can architect things in a more flexible way. And the final reason is because legal and data regulatory compliance. And this is quite aligned to the previous reason where you have customers distributed geographically and they are connected to the closest region. In this case, your customers need to connect to the region where they belong. So imagine you have customers in Germany, and even though maybe Paris region might have a smaller latency because maybe they are in that side of Germany that is faster to connect to Paris, you still need to connect to Frankfurt because of data regulatory laws. The data of German nationals needs to be within the German borders, we need to be inside stored in the Frankfurt region. So there's many countries that have these kind of laws in order to protect personal data to be leaked off and to be all around the world. So when you are building this type of applications, it's not all applications, it's some applications, you need to use the region, and you need to use the regions where your customers are kind of living or where they are saying that they are living. So that's something you might also want and need this multi-region approach. So now, after you understand that you need multi-region, that you might need active, you need to decide in which part of your application you are going to have this approach. As we saw previously, different reasons might take for different implementations. So the first question you might need to ask yourself is, can you live without this service? What happens if something goes wrong and this service is not available? For example, you have an e-commerce and you never want your e-commerce to be down. And part of your e-commerce is a microservice for recommendations. And maybe that recommendation service, microservice, doesn't need to be all the time active, super fail over. You can have it doesn't matter, because if it goes down, your users can still browse and purchase items from your store. They might not be able to see the recommendations, but that's not a critical part in your application. And when this happens, you need to architect your application to be resilient. So if the component of the recommendations is not working, you just not display a whole error in your website. You need to be able to just fail gracefully. And here is where event-driven applications come into place, microservice architectures come into play, and a lot of the different software architecture patterns for modern applications come into play. And then the next question is how much redundancy you need. How many regions are enough regions? For example, if you are implementing a disaster recovery, you can never be down. Maybe 2 regions are enough for you. But if you need to address the latency issue, maybe you need to have more because you need to have a global available application. So that's something you need to ask yourself when you are deciding this type of applications, why you're doing it and how you can address it with the least amount of complexity. Going multi-region is not a white or black approach. It's not everything is multi-region or nothing is multi-region. You need to decide each of your microservices, each of the parts of your applications, each of the parts of your system and dependencies need to be multi-region and because of your needs and which ones are not that important. One more thing before we end this video I want to address is the concept of business continuity. We talk about this is a disaster recovery aspect, but you need to think about this when you are thinking about disaster recovery because it's something we all want all the time, to be 100% uptime, the failover to be smooth as heaven, and to not lose any data. But doing that is super expensive and adds a lot of complexity. And when I mean expensive, it's not just in money, but it's also in human resources and time. So here you need to think about how much data you can lose at any time, or you can recreate basically, and how quickly you want to recover. For example, if you are doing something for the case that you can never be down, and maybe your chances are very minimal that a region goes down, you can have a little bigger kind of flexibility on the time of recovery because you know it's not something that is going to happen that often. So addressing and thinking about this will help you to make your strategies easier. If you look at AWS kind of white papers on disaster recovery, they will talk about these 4 strategies of business continuity. They will talk about the backup and restore, the pilot light, warm standby, and active-active. I've been mentioning a lot of the time during this video the active-active thing, but I have not talked about the other ones. Well, the thing is that the other ones are not that important because I'm talking about serverless applications. And serverless application, basically, it's provision as much capacity as you need. And when we talk about pilot light, when we talk about warm standby, and we talk about active-active, the biggest difference between these 3 strategies is the amount of capacity you are provisioning. So in the pilot light, you basically have your bare bones, and then you can basically fail over with a little bit more time. Warm standby has capacity provision, but is very minimal. And active-active has the full-blown capacity. But when we talk about serverless, basically these 3 strategies merge together into an active-active strategy where we will just think about backup and restore and active-active. While the traffic comes in, then things will start getting provisioned and warm up to the amount of traffic that you need. So when we talk about the strategy of backup and restore, it means basically to back up your data to another region. This is very simple to do, and this is a thing that you can implement right away. You can create global dynamo tables. We will talk about that in a full video, and I will show you a demo. You can use event bridge global endpoints. I will show you a demo of that as well. To just back up your events, you can use S3 cross-region replication. Let me know if you want a demo on that. I might do if you want. So, and these ways you can basically back up all the data, because at the end of the day, that's the part that is very hard to recreate. Your infrastructure, you can deploy it. It can be not consuming anything, but if you don't have the data to make that infrastructure work and to be able to get yourself up and recover, then it's kind of pointless that you have your infrastructure deployed in a different region. The second strategy is the active-active, where we have these two regions that are receiving traffic all the time. Things are deployed, the full two regions are exactly deployed the same, and we have, in this case, our event bus, our Lambda functions, our S3 buckets, our Dynamo tables. Everything is replicated. Our primary region replicates to our secondary region. Things are happening everywhere. And in the case of our primary region failing, we can fail over very fast to the secondary region, and voila, everything is working again. So that's the video for me today. I hope you like this type of videos where I go a little bit more in software architecture. In the next video, I will be going more in depth into data, on how to do replication of data around a multi-region strategy. There is 3 patterns I want to cover. These are software architecture patterns that you might find very useful when you are working with this type of application. Let me know if you like these videos, give a thumb up and subscribe because more videos are coming around this topic. I see you next week with another episode of FooBar.